Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto anime review. This one's going to be for episode 112, which is called the Chunin Selection Conference. And this was an interesting episode because on one hand you can be like, oh, it's just a recap episode and it kind of had something happen at the end. But I think focusing just in on like the audio, basically what was being said by the characters, the new stuff in the episode, it was actually very interesting to see primarily Shikamaru and Naruto, but then Sasuke a little bit at the end, just talk about this new sort of generation of characters and address their strengths and weaknesses within the context of who should be promoted to Chunin. Now, I think immediately it was made less interesting by the fact that they brought up like, oh, we can only choose one. And that, like, I don't remember that ever really being a thing before. In that, I get that, didn't they directly actually say in the first Chunin exam arc in original Naruto that, like, no one could be promoted, but, like, a lot of people could be promoted? It's not just about who wins, it is about, the way you kind of stand out over the course of the competition, and then by the end, Shikamaru was the one who was actually promoted, even though he didn't perform as well in the tournament. Now, they ultimately do something very similar here in that Shikadai ends up actually being the one who is promoted. I think it was fairly expected that was the case. But it was interesting to see what the thought process was before they had decided on that. Especially given that, I suppose Shikadai's father was there, in a way sort of arguing against him because he's the most strict on him, so he sees kind of the most flaws in him, when it's definitely the case of, the parents really heavily not wanting to overly favor their child, so they're really putting them all at risk, and that's why, it took Naruto by the end really, batting for Shikadai to get him the position, and that got him it ahead of Sarada. Now, it was interesting, like, in that, like, immediately they dismissed a lot of the characters, and that, like, your likes of Metal Lee, Iwabe, Namida, and so on, Wasabi. I like that they gave them their credit of, like, they've been growing, especially since the Chunin exams. They've all kind of developed a lot, but they're not suited to be captain material right now, so they're not in the discussion, but they are kind of growing. So they even praised the characters who just really weren't even in contention. The characters they ended up sort of singling out were Sarada, Denki, surprisingly, and Sumire. And then Shikadai, obviously a little bit, but then he comes back in. Denki, I like that they just acknowledge the fact of, like, he's very suited to be a leader, but is very just lacking in terms of, just, like, skill, which I suppose he went out very early, but has since demonstrated, a lot of good tactics and stuff like that. So he's a character who's suited to be a leader very heavily, and if he could just back that up with a decent amount of skill, he would be a very good captain. Whereas I think there are other characters out there who are more talented in battle, but just ultimately will probably never be overly suited to lead, at least this early on. And they don't stand out in their youth as being a leader. I suppose someone like, say, Chocho would be like that. She's able to, do pretty well in her fights when she really gets going, but her personality at this point is not suited to be a leader, even if her skills are kind of fairly high up there. So I like that. Sumire, they immediately acknowledge she wants to go into the Scientific Ninja Tool division, but from their perspective, they're like, I don't think that excludes her from being made a Chunin. She can still be made a Chunin, even if she goes in a different direction. In that they just acknowledge how, just talented she is on all accounts, and they primarily just kind of move past it in a way, maybe because of her past and because she's decided on something different. I think the real discussion probably comes in with Boruto and the fact that in the grand scheme of this episode, they really didn't touch on Boruto all that much. They didn't really make any sort of an argument for him all that much. In that Naruto was kind of like, oh, he's not up for debate because, like, he cheated in the exams and stuff like that. But I felt like they took the approach with Boruto of being like, here's what he did in the exam, and because of that, he's out. Whereas with nearly every other character, they address, like, stuff that happened afterwards. And that Shikadai basically was also kind of eliminated from discussion because of his performance in the exams. Yet he was brought back in because of what he did in the like Mitsuki retrieval arc, basically. Yet they didn't acknowledge Boruto really at all for what he's done since then. They didn't acknowledge the fact that like Boruto was involved in like taking out the Otsutsuki, or his desire to protect everyone and go as far as everything, which took Sarada out of position, but like it was fine for like Shikadai to be sent there because Shikamaru had confidence in him. It was a little bit of a weird one in terms of the logic. I ultimately got what they were going for in that, yes, it probably is a little bit too soon for like a Boruto to be a leader. But I absolutely could have seen by the end of this episode you just deciding that actually Shikadai and Sarada should be made Chunin. In that, like, I don't particularly agree with the idea that, like, Sarada is eliminated because she went with Boruto, but then Shikadai, who also went with Boruto, thought about it more, so he is justified in doing what he did, whereas the others aren't because they kind of let emotions guide them. When, especially from characters who often, in the past have sort of put, trust in their teammates ahead of other stuff. Like, it feels a bit weird that Shikadai is the one who gets, like, praised and gets the position ahead of anyone else. Whereas, like, I was a little shocked that, like, Boruto didn't get any sort of real praise here in terms of, like, he never lost his hope in Mitsuki or anything like that. That he was able to bring people around him to kind of have this mission happen. He was able to convince Shikadai once he got there to help them, and so on. He went as far as anyone has gone so far of this generation to help someone who a lot of other people would have kind of just given up on. So that would be my only criticism of this episode, and I think part of it is just the ongoing sort of Naruto-Boruto kind of dynamic. But I felt like they almost reverted Naruto to being a little bit stricter on Boruto than he actually is right now, just so they couldn't have him be a Chunin. In that, I very easily could have seen like them making 4 or 5 characters Chunin here without really too much of a problem coming into play, just because of how solid so many of the characters I think are. In that, I think maybe you have to do a little bit more of Boruto, but especially after the Mitsuki thing, I think a lot of the characters are kind of mature enough that they could lead at least a group. In that already, that like Team 7, the way they sort of operate is that it is Boruto and Sarada who sort of end up kind of leading the team. Mitsuki is the one who still has to sort of find his voice a bit. So, I suppose the question there is maybe like Boruto, Sarada, which one properly stands out as more of a leadership character. And it probably is Boruto for the same reasons that Naruto is a kind of an okay leader, in that he can bring people around him, whereas Sarada maybe doesn't quite have the kind of leadership charisma necessarily to make that happen. And then it meant that the section with Sasuke I don't think meant as much, because he didn't exactly say something that I think got Sarada taken out of the situation. It's just like he brought up that she was involved in this, but sort of everyone made the point of like she performed really well on it, but just because she went, she was gone. Yet that is the exact reason why Shikadai was made the position of Chunin. Now, maybe I'm misinterpreting some things here, but I think that's ultimately my problem with this episode. Is just like it felt like they made the decision that they were only going to make Shikadai the Chunin, like the writers did. And they had to come up with sort of not the best reasons for why other characters shouldn't be Chunin. And it just ended up feeling very weird by the end that, like, oh, he performed really well as a leader, but, like, so did Boruto, and, like, Sarada to a degree as well. Like, it felt weird just like what certain characters were punished for and what they weren't punished for. Similarly, like Boruto with the cheating, I did like that they brought up and sort of initially eliminated Shikadai over the fact of like, okay, Boruto cheated in that moment, of course, but also Shikadai made a pretty poor move right at the end of, just assuming Boruto could only make 4 shadow clones, and when he was surprised with like a development that Boruto could have learned through training if he didn't focus on the cheating. So that was a miscalculation on Shikadai's part, because he didn't account for a last kind of minute move or a growth in the middle of battle. That's something Shikadai needs to get over. And then I like there is the whole thing of like the Chunin exam. Like, yes, it's meant to test your strength on your own without the tools, but if they're looking at other outside stuff, then Boruto is actually fairly clever, especially when in previous Chunin exams they've sort of basically asked them to cheat, but cheat behind our backs. Just cheat without us finding out that you're cheating. That is part of some of the exams. That was the questionnaire test thing that they did in original Naruto. Was basically asking them to cheat. So in a way, like, Boruto sort of proved some pretty good ninja kind of tactics by actually keeping it hidden that he was kind of cheating or using this kind of special move. And he ended up using some fairly good ninja tactics with regards to, like, using his own strength for a certain part and then using this kind of last ditch kind of get out of jail free card thing when he needed to, and it working when it needed to. In terms of, like, Boruto has clearly grown since that moment now to the point where he understands like what he did wrong, but he would still have the tactical ability to use that sort of stuff in those situations. So I just felt like they analyzed some stuff but didn't analyze other stuff, and then were critical about some stuff and like a bit hypocritical in other stuff. Now, ultimately, Naruto having the final decision in all of this, I think that's ultimately what kept Boruto from becoming a Chunin, but I think if by the end of this episode they had made Shikadai, Boruto, and Sarada Chunin, I don't think I would have too much of a problem. Like, I really wouldn't see... Like, I think you could have made a point for, like, maybe Sumire also being made a Chunin as well, but... I suppose with next episode making it clear of like, okay, like he's now in a leadership position, Shikadai is now going to be the team leader on a mission, including some of his classmates. We'll see how exactly this goes. That's going to be fun if they focus very much on the idea of like he is now a leader now. What do we do from here? But so in that sense, like I think the episode could have been written a little bit better to make things just like. I absolutely understand everyone's perspective, whereas here it felt just a little muddy and things just got a little bit confused, hypocritical. You did this, so that's a positive, but you did that, so it's a negative, but it's like the same thing. What's going on there? But yeah, for a recap episode, this was actually fairly interesting because it was all about characters giving their opinions on the other characters. The older generation giving their perspective on the new generation, and giving their opinion on everyone. So that I did like. So yeah, that's been my thoughts on episode 112 of Boruto. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.